You set foot on foreign soil. Only this land isn't ruled by any country or government. In this land, we celebrate music. In this land, we celebrate games. In this land, we celebrate those who compose video game music. Welcome to the VG Embassy. Alright, welcome and thanks for tuning in to another episode of the VG Embassy. This is a show centered around video game music and the amazing online community of fans and podcasters that enjoy it. My name's Ed, and on each episode I'll take the role of Prime VGM Minister and invite a guest VG Ambassador onto the show to share with us their own video game music culture. Or I might share a part of my own culture on a solo show. This is episode 8, Pure Nostalgia with Cam Werme, and I have a first-time VG Ambassador with me today. Mr. Cam, thank you for joining me, and welcome to the Pantheon of VG Ambassadors.
Thank you for having me. I'm very excited about this.
So today's episode is going to be kind of, purely nostalgic, as the title goes. It's going to be kind of based on, like, the VGM Jukebox's testimonials. I guess all the tracks we've picked today, we have some sort of personal connection with, some sort of story that we'd like to tell in conjunction with the music. So Cam, first time on the show, but you've been on Pixel Tunes a number of times. Yeah. Fortunately, we live close enough that we can hang out in person and record. But for those of you who don't know you, can you just kind of describe like how you got into video game music and, you know, what you do on the web, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah, my experience with video game music sort of, I guess you could say, kind of started with Mega Man, because that was when I really noticed that the music was really good. So I borrowed them from my friend shortly after we met. He let me borrow them one at a time.
Oh, nice.
And he had 2 through 5 at the time. Just immediately, it was one of the things that I just like. This is not like other games that I played. Like these songs are really, really catchy and really, really, really drive like the gameplay. They're really important to the game, and I really noticed that early on. And I think it was probably around that time, and then afterwards, I just really started paying more attention to video game music, and I had my favorites over the years. You know, I had like a handful of songs that I just loved, but it wasn't really until I started that I realized there was sort of a community forming with the various podcasts that I really started actually learning about video games.
Right.
And like the different sound chips and the different, you know, styles. And I really started paying attention. And now I have, you know, thousands of, you know, tracks like on my iPod. Still use my iPod because there's nothing like it. And my experience with VGM exploded after basically Pixel Tunes and so that's basically how it started and how it took off and sort of became something of an obsession of mine, which is sort of different than it is with you, because for me, it's just sort of part of my personality where like I'll be into video game music. I will listen to nothing else but video game music for months.
Yeah.
And then I'll sort of stop, but not because I'm tired of it. I just sort of, my attention sort of drifts off into other things. So, like, for instance, when I started this Stone Temple Pilots tribute band, which is a thing you can look up, we're called Dumb Love if you're interested. Your odds are you're sort of in the age group, so you might have grown up with Stone Temple Pilots.
that whole grunge era, definitely my era.
Yeah, so dumbloveband.com if you're interested. But like when we started doing that, I listened to like basically nothing but STP.
Sure.
And I know the songs. It wasn't like I was familiarizing myself with them. I just went through a period where I was obsessed.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what I do. And then, you know, some months later, I'll hear like a Tim Fallon track or something, and I'll be like, God damn. and then I'll just and
draws you right back in again.
And I just get sucked back in, and I don't listen to anything else for months again. It's just sort of how it is for me.
That's funny. Yeah, I Mega Man 2 was for me one of the games that drew me into video game music as well, just because. And I've mentioned it on the show before, but because I had very little access to popular music. My mom was very conservative. She kind of she saw a risque video on MTV once in 1985 and completely cut me off from popular music. So video game music was all I had. So I had to record it onto tape, and then so that became part of just what I listened to when I was a kid. And so then I ended up growing up, and just like you, I got into grunge and all that stuff once I had my own autonomy. When I was in high school. So I flipped back and forth too, but I don't have a lot of that nostalgia or a lot of that ability to base previous experiences on popular music nowadays. So the popular music that I like coming out nowadays is based on what I liked in VGM when I was a kid. So it's almost a little bit backwards.
But that does make a lot of sense based on the sort of stuff you tend to like.
Yeah, exactly. A lot of the aggressive electronic stuff, sounds like Genesis music or, so it's very interesting the way that works out.
Yeah.
So let's say we get into our first track. We've got our first pick from Cam. We're going to swap back and forth and kind of swap stories as we go throughout the show today. So, Cam, what do you have up first for us?
This is a track from Castlevania 2, Belmont's Revenge on the Game Boy by Hidehiro Funauchi. It's called Praying Hands from the Cloud Castle level, and I'll go into what I love about this track.
All right, so we'll be right back.
That was Praying Hands from Castlevania 2, Belmont's Revenge on the Game Boy by Hidehiro Funauchi from 1991.
So did you play this game back when it was new, or is this kind of a later...
I played very few games when they were new, because I sort of came into it a little later. But this, I have a lot to say probably about all of these, tracks, but we were talking about this earlier, but I've often described this particular track as my absolute favorite video game track. And depending on my mood, that may not always be the case, but even nostalgia aside, like this song just has this really beautiful epic feel to it, where it starts with this sort of like very kind of intense arpeggiated intro.
Yeah.
And then from there it just builds until it reaches that climax of the song, which is very clearly the chorus,
Right.
It really hits me, like, even now today still gives me goosebumps because it's such a good song.
Yeah, it really does kind of bring you on a journey, for sure. And this whole soundtrack I really enjoy because I really like that they use the square wave as the bass. It has such a thick feel to it.
Meaty.
And in this track with that stereo separation where it kind of just bounces back and forth between the speakers, it just makes the song feel so much wider.
Yep.
And, if you were listening to this on the Game Boy hardware with that one mono speaker, it wouldn't have that kind of impact.
Which I did a lot, because there is a sound test that I discovered by accident.
Oh, okay.
because the password is it's 4 symbols. If you put all hearts, it takes you to a sound test.
Oh, neat.
If I remember correctly, yeah. But even then, when I would listen to it through the original Game Boy, like I would just play it and listen to it.
Yeah.
You know, even though it sounded like crap, it was still. That track is just so good to me.
Yeah, it has a lot of those, like you said, really beautiful. There's that one where like the triangle wave, it's like like almost a flute kind of a melody to it. I really enjoy that part.
Yeah.
And it just kind of makes the other parts sound even more energetic because you're kind of juxtaposing the two pieces together.
Right. And there's a lot of like arpeggiated sections. And by arpeggio, I don't mean how we tend to think of
like
it
the
as
fast trills on the Commodore 64 and stuff.
As an actual like individual notes being played, as in like on a guitar or a piano or something.
Yeah.
And those sections of the song really just the way it just fleshes out in this beautiful section by section build until it just kind of explodes into this beautiful chorus. And as great as this soundtrack is, there are other tracks on the soundtrack that I love, but this one is by far my favorite on it.
No, I don't blame you, man.
Which
It's
is
really
saying
good.
a lot because the whole soundtrack is so good. It's touching on the nostalgia aspect of it. This song reminds me of, there was a period where my 2 friends and I, it was mostly my friend Dan and I. I'll probably reference him several times because he was a big part of my whole.
Is this the Dan that I know?
Yeah. We used to do this thing where we would record ourselves in this ridiculous sort of radio show thing.
Sounds familiar.
Yeah. But it had, I mean, you wouldn't listen to it. No one but the 2 of us would listen to it and be like, this is just insane. There's something wrong with these kids. And I started it myself, where I just would record myself doing ridiculous stuff. And I labeled the cassette Psycho Album. I didn't think about it too much.
Seems like it summed it up pretty well, though.
Yeah. And then I played it for him one day, and then like we've just like laughed about it, and then we started recording, and then each cassette we would fill up a cassette, and that would be Psycho Album 2.
Ah, okay.
You know what I mean? And then we would fill them with ridiculous sketches, like on-the-fly sketches, non-scripted sketches. We just hit record.
Just total improv.
Yeah, and he still has them, and I can't wait. I haven't heard them in years. I can't wait to listen to them. But we wrote these things that we would very creatively call stories, which was like maybe a paragraph or 2 of type of nonsense I couldn't even begin to. I couldn't explain it to you. I would have to just read one to you.
Stuff that would have your parents commit you, basically.
Yes, exactly right. And at a point we decided, why don't we put theme music behind it while we're recording? And the Game Boy, with the games that had sound tests on them, was perfect.
Oh, yeah.
we would just like go to the sound test, hit play, and let it play, and we would just like. I really one of these days I got to show you one of these things. But there was one.
You were the first VGM podcaster ever. This is what it's building to.
I had actually done stuff like this even before then, when I was really young. But there was this one story that I wasn't there for. I was actually, when I was a kid, I was very ill. I was in and out of the hospital a lot of times. And this was one of those times I was in the hospital for some treatment for a few days. And while I was in there, Dan and Jake, the other 2 guys, they decided that they would get together and record some stuff too. And one of the stories was it was Jake. I think it was the first one he had written, and the Praying Hands music was the music that they picked just to put behind it. So like it starts with like this epic, arpeggiated intro, and he's reading this complete nonsense over it. And I remember when I first heard it, I was like, oh my god, this is so amazing. And like I said, those tapes still exist. I haven't heard them in a long time, but I can't wait to hear them.
Any plans to make like a whole SoundCloud channel full of them? Or
I wouldn't want to, like, part of me is like, I don't want to embarrass myself, but I also kind of want to be like, I do want to see people, to show people how awesome.
Yeah.
It's like,
maybe just like a few selections.
Also, it was also really freaking great, as crazy as it is. But another thing that I was mentioning to you earlier is, not only is this track, I have a lot of nostalgia of this track, it's like a favorite of mine, if not my favorite, but with all the Pixel Tune stuff you guys did, all the Castlevania tracks you guys did, all the spooky tunes, all the times that this track could have been played, each episode I was like, they're finally gonna play Praying Hands, I can't wait to hear it. And Mike would be like, here's another track from Castlevania 2, Belmont's Revenge, and I was like, this is it, here we go. And it would be a New Messiah or Ripe Seeds or one of the other ones, which I love, but each time it was like,
Well, that gave you the opportunity to share it yourself, so we didn't take that from you, which is kind of nice in a sense.
Yeah, it's one of the several reasons I picked it for this, because I want to put it out there.
Yeah,
talk about it.
I remember when we would do like the Castlevania episodes or the Spooky Tunes episodes, and it was like Mike already had them picked even before we decided to do the show.
Yeah.
So I'd be like, all right, yeah, let's, we would have a Google Doc that we would set up, and then we would add our tracks to that document and then record the show. And we would be like, all right, so let's set up for this next Castlevania episode that we're going to do. And I would go home that night, and that night he'd already have like all of his stuff filled out. And I was like, oh, I guess I'm picking from the rest.
Yeah.
But he was very enthusiastic about Castlevania, so I can imagine he was super excited about that. But those episodes also introduced me to this soundtrack as well. So I never played that game growing up. I had a Game Boy, but none of the Castlevania handheld games. So all of my nostalgia for the soundtrack comes from those spooky tunes and the Castlevania October episodes. So that's kind of what this track reminds me of, is finding out about that soundtrack and listening to the whole thing and be like, wow, this is really good. Why didn't I ever know about this?
Yeah, there's a lot of great Game Boy soundtracks. There's something about this one that even the one prior to it, which I believe he did work on. Funauchi did.
Yeah, he was one of the composers. Yeah.
It doesn't even come close.
Yeah.
It's good. It's very good. But this particular one, the tracks and the use of the stereo and it's just so good.
Yeah, this strikes me as like they had a newer, more enhanced sound driver that was able to let the composers do more of what they wanted to do. And the other one, the songs are well composed, but they're still very simple. It was kind of like they were struggling with how to actually implement the music that they had in their heads. So,
what I was thinking also is I should probably put like a date on when these things happened. That was probably around, I was probably 14, 15 at that time. So 95, 96. It was 96.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. I was graduating high school that year.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right. So anything else you want to talk about before we move on to the next one?
I think we can move on.
All right. So this one is going to be from me. It's a little bit less of a wacky story, but still a good one nonetheless. This is from Lee Trevino's Fighting Golf. This was released on the NES in 1988. This is the Japan Course song written by Lee Aram. All right, that was Japan Course from Lee Trevino's Fighting Golf, which came out on the NES in 1988, composed by Lee Aram, otherwise known as Aran Lee Shige. I'm not really sure if either one of those are the composer's real name, but just an SNK composer that worked for a little bit in the late 80s, making some NES and arcade soundtracks. But we're not here to talk about composers this episode too much. We're here to talk about nostalgia. So when I was growing up, my brother and I were really into video games, and we had our whole collection, and we would just spend all day playing video games when we weren't in school or outside riding on our bikes or anything like that. Yeah. My parents didn't care about video games at all. It was just one of those things that, kids do that, blah, blah, blah. But my grandparents were really into video games.
Like most grandparents.
Like most grandparents. Yeah. It started Back in 1983, I was, maybe even earlier than that, I think it was like 81, I was 3 years old, and we gave my grandfather an Atari 2600 for his birthday. And that was, before I had any other video game systems. And so, they lived one town over. We would go there every Sunday night for family dinner. It's kind of like an Italian family tradition. We still do that to this day. And so we would play Atari when we went over there, and then when Atari started getting to be a little bit obsolete, we bought him a Nintendo Entertainment System. And so we would have our own collection of games at home, and my grandparents got really, really into Tetris. And so they would play the NES all the time. And whenever it came around for my grandfather's birthday, he was really into golf. And when we couldn't get him any more, funny golf books or... couldn't think of what to get him. My brother and I would be like, let's get him a video game. So we would have something to play, that was new when we went over there. So we had golf on the NES at home, and we enjoyed it. We played it a lot. We never really played, in real life or anything like that. But my grandfather would always, be out there golfing with his brother and his cousins. And so we were out looking for a video game, and we just saw Lee Trevino's Fighting Golf on the shelf. And we were like, hey, this looks like a decent video game. We turned it over, and it looked a lot more advanced than NES Golf. It had, fancier graphics and different characters you can choose from, and a couple of different courses that you can play. So my brother and I got really excited about it. So we were like, Dad, let's get this for Grandpa. And my dad was like, sure, all right. So we got it and brought it home and turned it on. So this particular game was like one of the games that we had at my grandparents' house, but never at my house. So whenever I hear any song from this game, I'm like immediately transported to the den in my grandparents' house, and envision me and my grandfather, who's passed away for quite a while now, but just get those super nostalgic feelings of sitting there next to him playing golf, teaching him how to play the game. And then once he got better at it, trying to compete with him. And it was always a great bonding experience when we went over there. My grandfather was a great guy. He loved us so much, and we always had a great time together. But we would always kind of like bond while playing these video games together. And so I completely forgot about this game for a long, long time. And then they played a track because, Josh from the VGM Jukebox got really into golf music. Yeah. And so people started feeding him all these golf tracks. Mm-hmm. And so inevitably, something from this game came up. And I remember I was driving to work. This was probably about maybe a year ago or so, getting on the highway. And, they announced this. This is... I think it was the USA course from Lee Trevino's Fighting Golf, and the song started playing, and oh my God, like I literally started to tear up on the highway, like getting on the highway, and I'm like, I can't see because it's raining in my eyeballs. Yeah. It was a surreal experience. Like I don't normally get like emotionally nostalgic over a lot of things, but for some reason because I had never heard it anywhere else but in my grandparents' basement, it was crazy. So every time I hear this sound, and I still won't play that game to this day because I don't want to have an experience of playing that game outside of that house.
You don't want to
exactly. It's like sullying the memory of it.
I hear you.
So it was just there's not much of a story behind it. It's just that's like a raw emotional feeling that I would get from this game and that soundtrack. And then the song is great. I listened to it when I was a kid and it was just kind of background music from a golf game, but listening to it now, it's just got a great kind of relaxing, like when we were listening to it, you said it feels nostalgic without even being nostalgic.
It feels like a song you'd listen to while reflecting on something.
Yeah.
I mean, like it has that like...
So it just compounds it for me.
Yeah, it sounds like fond memories.
Yeah. And all the music from this game is kind of like that. It's just very calm and relaxing. And the background music will play in this game up until you start your swing. So you know how it's supposed to be quiet while you're golfing and such. So the song would play, and then as soon as you hit the button to start your backswing, everything would go silent, and then it would let you hit, and then it would start over again. So unless you really sat there and let the song play to the end, you wouldn't really ever hear the entire song all the way through. So it's nice to be able to have, NSF files nowadays where you can sit there and actually kind of like listen to the entire track on loop several times. Because when I was a kid, I think I would always hear maybe the first 20, 30 seconds at most. And then, I would stop and then it would start again on the next hit. So you get to hear a lot of the extra parts that kind of come in and these weird little like like noisy drum fills and stuff that were kind of surprising to me when I heard the whole thing play through. But yeah, so that is Lee Trevino's Fighting Golf. Eventually, I'll probably go back and try to play it again, just because I'm starting to lose the memory of what the game was about, so I'll probably just be transported back to my grandparents' basement again, next time I play the game. So, but yeah, that's nostalgia number one for me. This was probably around 88, 89. This came out when I was 10 years old, so I was probably between 10 and 12. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure that the game was brand new when we bought it for my grandfather, but it was still definitely being sold on store shelves, so it had to have been within the first couple years of release,
So I don't think either of us are really sports aficionados.
Not too much.
So what I'm curious about is I haven't actually played this game. I haven't seen it. And I usually will look up games prior to doing something like this, but this time I just wanted to hear the stories and not have any sort of notion of, So, do you know anything about Lee Trevino?
Well, I know that he won Masters tours, and he was just, like Arnold Palmer. He was right up there with being one of the golf greats.
But he was notoriously hot-tempered. So when I see his name in the title of a game called Fighting Golf, that's got to be where it came from.
Yeah,
that's sort of his. He was known as being a really fiery guy. He would miss a putt and throw his club, knock over his clubs.
Oh, you know what?
So
in this game, if you miss like a putt or something, your character will like break the putter over his knee.
Perfect. Yeah,
that's like the only thing that happened.
I was hoping they would have incorporated that somehow because like that's kind of what he was known for.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
And as we were looking up Lee Aram's other composing credits, we did notice that there was a soccer game called Fighting Soccer that was also made by SNK that he composed for. So maybe this was a like fighting sports series of games that they had released. That's really funny. I remember back on VGM Jukebox when they did play this that Emily and Josh were also theorizing like about fighting golf and what if it was a full contact golf sport, and it kind of makes you wonder about that stuff.
It made me wonder like. Because I had this image in my head of the fighting sequences in Blades of Steel. Mm-hmm. If you miss a shot or something, like you just like it pans to a shot where like it's the golfer, it's you like in fisticuffs with like your caddy or somebody.
Kind of like I told you should have aimed 3 degrees to the left.
Because there had to be fighting in it somehow, but I guess not. But.
Or your golf bag comes to life and you have to fight your clubs or something.
Or it doesn't. You're just punching it like a punching bag.
Letting off your rage meter.
Right, yeah.
Oh, man. All right, so I'm done with my stories. What else would you like to talk about today?
I would like to talk about a little track from Tiny Toon Adventures for the NES. It's Monty's Mansion. It's the last level in the game. And it's composed by Jun Funahashi. And the other two I don't really know anything about are Masae Nakashima and Sakoto Minami.
All right.
From 1991.
Let's take a listen.
So that was Monty's Mansion from Tiny Toon Adventures for the NES by Jun Funahashi, Masae Nakashima, and Satoko Minami. So, this was the first NES game that was mine. So my brother had the NES when I was growing up, and I never really got to play it. I would play it at my friend's house. Never really got to play his. I would watch him play it. He was very, very, I was just like the dorky little brother. He didn't want me touching his stuff.
Yeah.
But when, after my parents separated, my brother had grown up a little bit. He sort of outgrew it, which is really funny to say now because we're like, NES.
Now we're like 30s and still playing.
We're talking about it all day long. But when my brothers moved in with my mom and my sister and I stayed with my dad, and I ended up keeping the NES. So that's when I sort of like really was able to really find myself. and you know, I just had the games that he had, and I would just play them, and then I realized, like, wait, I could get my own games for this thing. And I was visiting my mom, and I was out with her. If it was like a software, one of those software places in the mall or a toy store or something, and she bought me this game, brand new in the shrink wrap, and it was, and it to this day is one of the only 2 NES games I've ever owned new.
Wow. The
other one was Alien 3. That was the first NES game I bought. Anyway, that's a different story, but so yeah, this was the first one. This was my game, the one I could call mine. Everything else was my brother's, even though it was all technically mine now.
Just on like long-term lend from him.
Right, yeah. And it was also, to bring Dan up again, is really the thing that sort of bonded us when we met. Because when we met, I don't remember. It was very quickly we got on the topic of video games, because it was like sort of a new thing for me where I was really getting into it, and we were 11 or 12 at the time. And he had this game too. So it was like immediately like, oh, you have that game? And we would just talk about it. And I think at that point, I think neither of us had beaten it yet. But now when I hear this track, it takes me right back to my dad's, his girlfriend at the time. I was playing this game in their living room. And it was me and it was her kid, her son, who was a little younger than me, and I had brought the game over, and I think I brought my NES over, and I hooked it up at their place. I had gotten to the last level. It's a tough game. I don't know how much. It's not one of those.
Yeah, no, this game's not easy.
It's not. It definitely has a good challenge to it. But I had finally made it to the end, and there's no passwords or anything. It's one of those games you got to beat in one shot. And the final level is very tough. There's a lot of memorization in it. So when I hear this now, as soon as the track begins, every time I hear that, you could play me this track 12 times in a row right now, and every time I hear that, I think of the sound, the little jingle when you die, and then you start at the beginning of the level, like, and because I would do that.
It's almost like a conditioned response.
Yeah. Like, so that song reminds me so much of the struggle of repeating that level over and over and over.
Yeah.
Like every time. But it's not in like a negative way. I'm not like, oh, that song. It takes me back to that house and that living room and playing that game over and over and over, and then finally getting past that final corridor where there's like this vertical corridor where you're jumping up this moving platform that's like an elevator. And there's these money bags that are shooting out the wall, and you got to dump and duck, and then dump and duck, jump and duck, and then jump and duck and duck and jump and jump and duck. Like there's like a pattern.
Okay.
And then you get it, and you finally get to the top, and you fight Monty, and that day, and I beat it, and it was such a big deal because it was like this is the game that this is my game. This is the first game I got and I finally beat it, and this track, the whole soundtrack is very, very nostalgic for those reasons. First game, and
I can just imagine the pride. Here's a game that's mine, that I finished by myself.
I opened it.
There wasn't anybody else involved in it.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, definitely.
And the water level and the Wacky Land are also very, very, very nostalgic for me. The whole soundtrack, but this one in particular reminds me specifically of that day. And that was 90. That must have been 93. I want to say.
Okay, so you were probably.
I would have been at that time. I would have been 12.
Okay, yeah. So to finally have your own stuff after that much time, you must have really realized what that meant at that point.
Most kids I knew, they'd been playing. They had their own NES in their living room since they were 3 or 4. You know what I mean? So and it was there when I was young too, but I didn't really get as much of a hands-on experience with it.
Right.
Until, thank God, my parents got divorced and my brothers moved away.
That's funny. Yeah. I mean, my brother and I are only about 2.5 years apart, and we shared a bedroom. So, whatever was his was mine, and mine was his.
Had to be, yeah.
So yeah, exactly. Otherwise, we would have been fighting about everything constantly. So, but it was always nice to have another person to play multiplayer games with. Once in a while we would fight over stuff. Like, we would play 2-player Super Mario Brothers, but then once we had that game for like 5 years, we'd get really good and we'd be able to get to like the 8th world without dying. So the other person is like,
I'm impressed.
Can I play? Like, what's going on here? It would be a long time in between deaths where the other person would just be like, come on, I thought we were playing multiplayer. And then we'd start trying to make each other die and stuff. So
that's such a different, like, that's great. Like my experience as a kid, like, I didn't have that. I didn't have the 2-player. I have 2 brothers, but we didn't. My brother John and I have. We used to play the Ninja Turtles arcade game a lot.
Yeah,
that was the game that the 2 of us played together, and we would beat it every time.
Yeah, my brother and I would do the same thing.
But there really wasn't a whole lot. Like my other brother, Jordan, who had the NES, like, I can't think of a game that the 2 of us ever played together.
Just too far apart in age. Yeah.
Or we just didn't like, because he was protective of it, and I didn't really.
You're just gonna mess it up, little Cameron.
Yeah, exactly. and I just I didn't have that, like. I would play games at my friends' houses, but even then I can't think of like a lot of like 2-player games we would play, just take turns. But different. Everybody's experience is different.
Yeah. Well, congratulations on beating Tiny Toons.
Yeah, well, thank you. My 12-year-old self appreciates it.
All right, so speaking of brothers and playing, I'm sure that this next one will probably bring a lot of rivalries to everybody's mind. This is the SNES 1992 release of Street Fighter II, The World Warrior. This is the Zangief theme, and this was composed by Yoko Shimomura, by Yoshihiro Sakaguchi, Tetsuya Nishimura, and also Isao Abe worked on this game as well. So let's take a listen to Zangief. Alright, that was the Zangief theme from Street Fighter II, the SNES edition, which came out in 1992, composed by Yoko Shimomura, Yoshihiro Sakaguchi, Tetsuya Nishimura, and Isao Abe. So, I remember this being one of the first games that I was ever, like, super hyped for, as well as I'm sure almost everybody else that loved this game. So we were subscribers to EGM, Electronic Gaming Monthly, probably one of the most popular video game magazines in America at the time, and they were hyping this game up like crazy. I had known about this game because my family and I took a vacation to Lake George up in New York, and they have, like, there's a big touristy place up there. There's this kind of commercialized strip, and they had a couple arcades there. And so that summer, my brother and I went to one of these arcades and saw a Street Fighter II machine for the very first time. And we had no idea what it was. It hadn't really become a phenomenon yet. And so he and I played it, and we really liked it. We saw similarities to Final Fight, which we were big fans of in the arcade at the time. And so then EGM started coming out with all these Street Fighter II things. We were like, oh, I remember that game from the arcade. And we didn't really have many arcades around here when I was a kid. There were a couple arcade machines at movie theaters and bowling alleys and stuff, but no, like, real dedicated big arcade. And so we just thought the game was kind of like, like arcade games back then were just like, you would see the game, you would play it, probably never hear about it again until, you were older and you started like downloading it on MAME or something. So we just thought it was one of those games, and then people started talking about it and, going crazy over it, and it would, like, EGM would have article after article about it, every single issue that came out. And so when they finally announced it on Super Nintendo, he and I went crazy. We were like, we gotta get this. And so there was this little electronics store in the center of town, And so my mom took us there after we begged her, and we put down a pre-order because we knew that it was going to be sold out everywhere. The hype was just too big.
Yeah.
And I was in maybe middle school, 7th or 8th grade at the time, and even all my friends were like going crazy over this game. I think they had finally put one in like a Caldor or like a Bradley's department store or something. There was an arcade machine that had Street Fighter in it. So my brother and I would beg my parents for quarters every time we went there so we can finally play an arcade version of it. And so the day comes, the release day, we got the call from the electronics store that it was in stock, and we were like, raring to go. And so I remember specifically, it was like dead of summer. I think the game came out in August or something. We had no school. And my mom was like, I have to wait until the mail comes, because in the mail is going to be my paycheck, because she was a teacher, so she would get checks mailed to her over the summer. And once I get the check, then we can go out, I have to deposit the money, and then we can go buy the game. And for some reason, the mail that day was like 3 hours late. And my brother and I were just, this entire time, sitting on the couch in the living room, looking out the bay window at the mailbox, where's this mailman? Where's this mailman? And we were just so hyped up. We've never been so hyped up. I remember planning out in my head like what button configuration I wanted to use for the, because it's a 6-button game, and I was like, I'm gonna put the light punch and the light kick on the shoulder buttons, and then the hard kick and the hard punch on Y and B, and then I'll be able to get to all the stuff here.
Oh, man.
And my brother and I would fight about our button configurations, like which one is going to be the better one. And so the finally came. We all piled in the cars, as soon as we possibly could. She drove to the bank, deposited the check, went to the electronics store. We finally got the game, brought it home, and I swear to God, the rest of the summer until we got back to school, this game never left the Super Nintendo. He and I would play over and over and over again. And it was fantastic because there was all the endings to see, so we had to get good enough with all the characters to be able to see everybody's ending. And then when we didn't want to play the story mode or, the one-player mode, we would play against each other. And it was just, that summer was like the summer of Street Fighter. It was all we would ever play. And I ended up getting really super good because my brother was, like I said, 2.5 years younger than me. He was kind of a sore loser. So if I started beating him too much, he would start to get mad.
Yeah.
But if I let him win
you would know
too much, he would know I was letting him win. He would also get mad. So I had to get to the point where I was like, okay, I had to be able to be good but finesse it so much that I looked like I was winning and still losing. Yeah, so I would let him win a match, and then I would win a match, and then I would bring the final match down to the very, very end, and then let him win it. And so it was interesting that I got to be able to control the characters so well that I would kind of finesse and sneak my loses in. And every once in a while, I would trounce him and be like, oh, I guess I just got lucky,
right.
Because he would throw controllers, and so. That's how I ended up getting involved in my current position in IT and repairing computers and stuff, because he would smash the controller against the ground and it would pop open and all the buttons would come out, so I'd have to get all the rubber grommets and all the buttons and screw it back together. But I would over and over again, and I would just kind of memorize. I could do it in my sleep after a while, like an army soldier, reloading a gun or something. It was just muscle memory and putting these controllers together. So, but yeah, I mean, that was just such a great memory we had. The Zangief theme was always my favorite, I think, because I listened to a lot of new wave and kind of electronic Depeche Mode style stuff back then. My brother was more into rock and heavy metal and all that, so he was really a bigger fan of the Guile theme and Ken's theme and some of the more rock-end tracks. But I like this tune because it always just had those little plunky kind of percussion hits, and the horn style stuff, like Gary Newman. It always reminded me of a lot of the stuff that I would listen to in the 80s. So this was always my favorite track, and this just became my version of the soundtrack, because in the arcades, the sound was never turned up. I could hear the cymbal crashes and stuff, and the kicks and the punches.
It's more about the sound effects in the arcade.
Right, exactly. So when I finally heard the arcade version, I was like, whoa, this is completely different, because it was FM. But whenever I listen to the Super Nintendo version of the soundtrack, that's the version I grew up with. So that's what I don't know. Did you have any experience with Street Fighter growing up?
Zero.
Really?
I still to this day have never played Street Fighter 2.
That's crazy.
Actually, I know it sounds really crazy. When the first Mortal Kombat game came out, I just from that point I was like, this is awesome, and Street Fighter looked silly. I mean, that's just how. Like now I can look at it and see, like, well, they're obviously very different games.
Right.
My only experience with Street Fighter 2 is the Tiger handheld. The Tiger Electronics.
Not the best way to be introduced.
Which was sort of my video game experience prior to video games. When my brother was playing his NES, I'd be playing pinball or something.
Little LCD screens.
Or Karnov, because that was my introduction to Karnov, was the Tiger Electronic game. I didn't know it was an actual, console or arcade game. But that was my only experience with Street Fighter.
Interesting. Yeah. I remember my brother and I saw our first Mortal Kombat machine, again on vacation. We were up at Niagara Falls. We stayed on the Canada side. And again, a very touristy section. There was an arcade there. And we were wandering around through all the machines. And then there was this huge crowd around the Mortal Kombat. And my brother and I were like, oh, well, there's this game. And we immediately recognized it as like a Street Fighter clone. But then we saw people doing fatalities and stuff. And we were like, whoa, this is crazy.
Yeah.
And I never really got that much into it because I always felt like it was the competitor to my Street Fighter.
Yeah.
And, totally. I would play it, but it just felt so different and so stiff. I really like the flow.
It is very stiff.
Yeah.
Because I haven't played Street Fighter, but I've seen it tons.
Right.
So I'm familiar with it. I'm familiar with the game because I've watched people play it. I've seen all kinds of videos. I know the game as well as someone who's never played it can know it.
Right.
And it's clearly a very different. I mean, it's a fighting game.
Yeah.
But that's really all those two series share with each other: Mortal Kombat and Street Fighter.
Yeah.
Because they're so different. I mean,
exactly.
Like the stiff is the perfect word to describe Mortal Kombat, because those characters, they walk at each other standing perfectly upright, and they just kind of like. The way they move is very, very just kind of like, I'm going to come at you now. Whereas for Street Fighter, the guys are just like flipping all over the place, and the character animations are much more like... There's a lot
like a real kung fu movie kind of idea. Yeah.
A very different type of game.
Yeah. And later on, even nowadays, the Mortal Kombat games and the Street Fighter and Street Fighter 5, they're still very different games from each other. And I'm glad that happened, because the other games that came out around that time, like Fighter's History from Data East and everything, they were all like direct ripoffs of Street Fighter. They would follow that same kind of formula, and Mortal Kombat was the first big fighter out there to really change things up and make other developers realize that you could make a fighting game that didn't necessarily have to copy Street Fighter move for move to become popular. And nowadays we have all these different fighting games, all these different fighting styles to appeal to nearly anybody who wants to be in that one-on-one kind of realm. So it's good. Competition makes people innovate, and so that's the reason why Street Fighter and Mortal Kombat were kind of necessary to the current fighting landscape today. So anyways, let's move on to our next track. Cam, what do you got set up for us?
Oh boy, this is a track from Chakan. I don't know how you want to pronounce it.
I've always pronounced it Chakan.
Chakan.
Shaka Khan.
Yeah, right. There's a similarity there, which is why I sort of don't say it, because it sounds kind of weird.
Right.
So Chakan, the Forever Man for the Genesis. This is the stage select song you hear during the basically the level select screen. It's by Mark Miller and Jason Schur. That was the stage select theme from Chakan the Forever Man on the Genesis / Mega Drive by Mark Miller and Jason Schur. So, this game, I have a really cool, kind of weird story to go with this game. Not this track in particular, but there's a reason for that. So, again, my friend Dan and I were up very late one night. I think it was probably during the summer between 7th and 8th grade, I want to say. This was my game that I had brought over. Never really got very far because it's a freaking hard game.
Yeah.
But we were up really late. It was really quiet. Like his apartment was dead quiet. I think he was sitting on the couch watching me play. I was sitting on the floor or on the coffee table or something playing. All of a sudden, all I can say is something happened.
Okay.
I was playing and while we're sitting there totally quiet, just kind of zoned out, the most bright light you can imagine enveloped the whole apartment.
Oh, wow.
It seemed to come from outside. There was no sound associated with it. There wasn't like a zapping sound or an explosion or anything at all. It just filled up the room. This quick flash, the brightest light, pure white light I had ever seen. And I guess it knocked out the power, but only so quickly that the game froze. It didn't like glitch out. And no other time had this ever happened. I mean, because games glitch out all the time.
Yeah.
But like the note that had been playing when it happened rang out.
Oh man.
In a very Genesis kind of way. It was like and it rang out until I guess just the wave of the note just kind of fizzled out.
Flattened itself, yeah.
And the shot of where I was in the game, freeze frame, just a still of the screen just froze there.
That's freaky.
And to this day, we refer to it as the Flash. and every once in a while, we'll be talking and be like, God, remember how freaking weird that was? And we still will just like puzzle over it. Like we still have no idea what it was. For a couple hours later, we stayed up just sort of like, honestly, we were like frightened.
Yeah.
Because we didn't know, like maybe we were just abducted or something.
Yeah.
Like in that like fraction of a second that happened. But it was especially creepy because the sound of the Genesis and this game, like the soundtrack is very dark and weird. And when that happened, that note rang out. So it was like, whoosh, the flash just happened. And it
just froze time.
Right. It filled the apartment. Like it wasn't just like a flash of light that sort of like blinked in front of, half the living room or something. It was like, whoosh, and it was so bright. And that note just...
That's crazy.
And I can still hear it. It's so wild. I picked this track, though, because, well, for one, I love it. And you hear this track throughout the whole game.
This would have been a great Spooky Tunes pick for Back on Pixel Tunes.
It is, yeah. And you hear it every time you go, back. There's like this realm where you go to between levels, and you pick which portal you go through, and the portal takes you to... I'm using a lot of hand gestures right now. The listeners have no idea, but the portal will take you to like each realm, each place had its own like elemental. There's the air stage and the fire stage, and I'm 90% sure that where I was when this happened was in the second Earth stage. And the reason I didn't pick that track is because that is one of the weirdest cacophony of noises. It's just like brown. It's just if you want to like
just like abstract noise.
Yeah, listen to if you want to Earth Stage 2 or whatever it is from Chakan, and you'll hear why I didn't. It's not a very pleasant listening experience.
Yeah.
It's just like random weird sounds that the Genesis makes, just compiled into just noise. It's just noise.
I can imagine that probably made the freezing even more creepy then.
Yeah. Because I was already in this sort of like kind of mood playing this level. Not to mention that I was like maybe stressing out a little bit because it was so hard and I'd probably died 1,000 times. But it's a creepy level, creepy music. It was quiet. It was late at night. The whole town was asleep. Because the windows were open and it was in the middle of summer and there was no sound coming in from outside. And then this flash happened and it was wild.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
It sounds like a transformer blew out or something like that.
That's a number of people had
because we had that happen across the street from my house actually once, and the same thing, big bright light. Our power actually went out.
Was there any sound associated?
No sound at all.
Huh.
No.
Because there wasn't even a transformer nearby. Like, we went out and looked, there wasn't it. So, but I'm sure there was a perfectly reasonable worldly explanation for it.
Right.
You know what I mean?
It just seems so otherworldly.
It just is bizarre.
Yeah. Very weird.
Yeah.
But kind of a cool memory, I guess. You know,
it's a very powerful memory.
So did you have to start from the game all over again, or did you ever end up?
I mean, obviously it froze, and I started the game probably several times, but I do want to say that probably is the farthest I ever got.
Yeah.
Because the game is divided up into 2 sections. Each one has 4 levels. So like the first one is like the material plane or something, whatever they call it. And the next one is like the aerial plane.
Ethereal? Material and ethereal?
Yeah. Maybe. That sounds right. But and it's very hard. So the first 4 levels are not easy, but I could usually make it through.
Yeah.
The second round is brutal. So I think I got as far as I ever did. It's a hard game, really hard game.
Stupid power fluctuations ruining your gaming experience.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, well, let's move on to our next track. This is a pick from me. This is probably the most obscure game we're going to have on the whole show. This is from the Super Scope 6 SNES cartridge. This is the Mole Patrol theme, composed by Ryoji Yoshitomi, Yumiko Kanki, and Hajime Hirasawa. Let's take a listen. All right, we're back. That was the Mole Patrol theme from the Super Scope 6 cartridge, released on the NES in 1992, composed by Ryoji Yoshitomi, Yumiko Kanki, and Hajime Hirasawa. I don't have, maybe not a specific, like, nostalgic story for this particular, like, theme, but this was a track on this game that I absolutely loved. I just thought it was the bee's knees. Just something about the drums and that bass and the hi-hat and the whole, like, pure percussive element to the whole thing. I recorded this song onto tape, as I did as a kid.
I did that on some occasion too.
And played it for everybody that I knew. And I was like, listen to this amazing song, and nobody was impressed with it.
I can picture that.
It was like so futile.
Yeah.
But this kind of started making me realize that I had very different musical tastes from most people that I knew. And, later on ended up finding other people that had this similar musical tastes. This eventually branched off into like very aggressive techno, which we'll get into later on in the show. And, in the industrial music that I really like, and all this very noisy kind of stuff. And so this started me on kind of like this long journey of kind of like not conforming to pop music and stuff like that. But the Super Scope is one of those devices that kind of fits my taste in music, where I really liked it and not a lot of other people did. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you recall, but Pixel Tunes Radio, Mike and I did that show on Battle Clash and Metal Combat, which are 2 Super Scope games that are fantastic. Like, it's worth buying a Super Scope just for those 2 games. Mm-hmm. And even Mike at the beginning was like, why are we going to do a show on a Super Scope game? So, and then I was able to convince him, he actually went out and bought his own Super Scope just to play those games.
Oh, right. I think I remember that.
Yeah, so I don't know. I mean, I feel like doing my own music podcast and having weird tastes like this kind of helps introduce other people to that stuff. But then I also try to play music that I feel everybody would be more in tuned to enjoying as well. So I don't know. I guess, like I said, it's not as much of a nostalgic story as it is nostalgic for learning about my place in the world and where I sit in terms of my personal taste versus what popular taste is. And it's something that you struggle with on the internet a lot because, I can't even count the number of times on like a video game music Facebook group or something where somebody will be like, what's your opinion on this versus that? And everybody will be like, oh yeah, Sonic is the best. And I'll sit here and be like, I really enjoy the Contra Hardcore soundtrack more than Sonic, and I'll get gasps, from everybody around the internet. And it's tough being the guy that's always kind of like the odd one out because people start to feel like you're trolling them and just giving a contrary opinion just to do it. And I'm like, no, guys, this is my genuine opinion on this stuff, and I wish you would just let me have it for a change. So yeah, I mean, Super Scope, my brother and I, again, it's a Brendan and I story. We played it ages ago. I was very excited about it. Nintendo Power really fed us with all the propaganda in their magazine. And he and I, subscribed to that as well as EGM and got really hyped up about the Super Scope. When we were kids, we got the NES, the action play set, so it came with Duck Hunt and the light gun as well as the Super Mario Brothers. So we were into that kind of light gun stuff. And then the Super Scope just looked like it was years beyond what the Zapper could do. And so, we got it, and we were impressed with it, and we liked the games that came with it, and it just kind of fizzled, and unfortunately, just kind of nothing really came of it, and I had always wished that there was more to it, and to this day, like, I still like playing Virtua Cop and House of the Dead, and, with the Wii, there was a lot of light gun games that came out just because those Wii controllers really lent themselves towards light gun style games, and so there was a big resurgence of that when the Wii came out, and now again, we've got the Switch and the Wii U, and those games are kind of going by the wayside again because the equipment doesn't really exist to play them effectively. So, good nostalgia for that. I guess the Super Scope in general and all the fun times that we had playing those games.
It is kind of weird that there was the NES light gun and the Super Scope and the Menacer, and like all the consoles had their own version of it, but it never did particularly well. So it's like, why did they keep? It's like they kept trying,
right?
And it never really took hold.
Yeah, even with the Saturn, I guess the Virtua Cop series and the House of the Dead series, which later appeared on the Dreamcast, like those took off. I remember House of the Dead being pretty big. I think there's like 4 House of the Deads at this point. So those were moderately successful, but other than that, it's like there weren't too many other like Time Crisis and like companies that like Namco that made Time Crisis would release these big, huge, well-made light guns that were like for one game only. It's like it seemed like so much effort and so much money spent to be able to play one particular game, which would end up selling off the shelves for like $80-$90 because you got the game, plus you also had to get this peripheral to go along with it. So, I mean, I guess maybe one of the reasons why they didn't do too well is because it was just kind of cost prohibitive. And if you knew about light guns and the fact that none of them really were that successful, you're going to be very leery about spending $90 on a package that you can only use for maybe one and maybe a game or two that came afterwards. So,
For me, I played with a light gun when I was a kid, and for me, I wonder if it has anything, the lack of success for the idea of this sort of thing, has anything to do with what was my experience was, because the NES gun is called, it's the Zapper,
right?
So it's like, oh, cool, the Zapper, I'm going to zap things. And then you point at the screen and go, ka-chunk, and it goes, ka-chunk. You get that, like, spring sound. And it's just like
very
this
mechanical
really clunky
sound.
mechanical sound. And for me, I was just like, that's not cool.
Yeah.
Like, that's not zapping. I'm not zapping anything. I'm just going, ka-chunk, ka-chunk. Like, you pull the trigger, it goes 3 inches into the handle, it was just, that's an exaggeration.
Yeah.
But it just was not, I didn't feel like I was doing any zapping.
Understandable.
So I just kind of like, I didn't want to really.
Yeah. I mean, at least on the Super Scope, it was just a regular button that you pressed, and so there wasn't really any sound, so the sound would come out of the TV, so you would get the bazooka or gun sounds from the game instead of the actual device. There wasn't any real, you just hear, because pushing the button over and over again, but.
It sounds like a better mechanism for the Zapper.
Yeah, no, they really should have had more of just a button style. I guess they wanted to make it as much like a real gun as possible, and didn't work out too well on their part.
Yeah, not for me.
So, Anyways, let's move on to the next track. This kind of goes in a very opposite direction from light gun games. What you got coming up next?
So this is from Secret of Evermore, also on the SNES. It's the music from The Great Pyramid by Jeremy Soule from 1995.
Let's take a listen.
That was Great Pyramid from Secret of Evermore on the SNES by Jeremy Soule from 1995. So this was one of the 2 Super Nintendo games that I got while I was in the hospital. I think during the first stretch of time I was in there when I first got sick. I was in there for a while. And they had this traveling Super Nintendo cart in the hospital, and you would ask, I would play a lot of, I played a lot of Star Fox, lots of this, because I got this and Super Punch-Out. I had asked my brothers or my dad or whomever it was while I was in there to get me a game from Funko Land, and the first one I think was I think I got Super Punch-Out first, then I got this one. And then, so the memory I have attached to this track in particular, it no longer has anything to do with the hospital. I'm out of the hospital at this point. And I was at the beach, so my family had a house at Long Beach Island, New Jersey, and we would go every summer. I hadn't been there in a little while. My grandfather had sold the house. It wasn't technically ours anymore, but I had gone there with Dan, my friend Dan, and he had never been there. And so the two of us, I got to go there. I got to go to like my favorite place in the world with my best friend. It was just awesome. And I brought my Super Nintendo and I hooked it up and didn't play it a whole lot down there because it was, you go down there for the beach and the environment and the just the beach community and all that stuff. But like at night, I would play it. On a rainy day, I would play it. And I had gotten to the pyramid level and I was totally stuck. It's just one of those levels where like, it's not particularly hard to figure out, but for some reason you just never end up going down this one corridor.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And you just
you finally do it, you're like, why didn't I think of that?
And I was just completely stumped for what seemed like weeks. I don't remember how long it was. So I would play that level while we were down there a lot, just wander around the level. And we were at the beach one day. And so this must have been summer of 90. I want to say this was summer of 96. And we were at the beach and we encountered this kid, younger. He was younger than us, maybe not by a whole lot, a couple years younger than us. And I don't remember what it was that made us talk to him. He had a sister that probably had something to do with it. Slightly older sister that we were kind of.
Good enough reason.
Yeah. It's part of the whole memory. I remember that she had like a black bathing suit thing. Anyway, so we were talking to this kid and he was familiar with Secret Evermore. He had beaten it. He was like, he knew it in and out, you know? So we were talking to him and I was like, I'm stuck. I don't know like how to get out of it. And he was like, well, I don't remember if he actually told me how to get unstuck because I wasn't able to explain exactly how I was stuck.
Right.
But I think he did give me some pointers that ultimately led to me finding my way out, to getting out of the pyramid, getting to the end of the pyramid.
Cool.
Finding Tiny and the ruby eyes and it's the whole thing. But the music of the pyramid reminds me of sitting in the living room at the beach house with all the windows open and the breeze coming in, and just like after getting back from the beach, getting cleaned up and hanging out and playing that game and just being miserably stuck. that really and I have lots of memories of that house and of the beach and that time and being a kid and going there, and I have a lot of memories of video games from that period too, but this is one of the only ones that crosses those two things, those two significant aspects of my
two very different environments too.
Yeah. So like, lots of things remind me of both of those things, but this is the only thing that kind of brings them both together. And I think of this song, when I hear this song, I think of sitting in the beach house living room and playing this game, and that kid and his sister and talking to him.
What a chance encounter too.
I know. Like I happened to have that game. I just had recently gotten it, and
just happened to meet this wandering expert on the beach. Almost like you're playing an RPG, by yourself.
Right. And it's funny because like I had never really, as a kid, I was never that outgoing. I wouldn't like talk to a lot of other kids on the beach. You know what I mean? It might have been Dan. He might have just sort of like noticed. I mean, who knows? Maybe the kid had like a Super Mario Brothers towel or something.
Yeah.
Like, he's in the video games.
Right.
He's talking about RPGs and stuff. Yeah, that's my nostalgia for that song.
I've only met Dan a couple times, but he strikes me as kind of like the guy who would like go up and randomly start talking to people sometimes.
But not because he's particularly outgoing either. It's just he sometimes just feels like he feels when it's okay to talk to somebody about something. And
we'll have something in common.
Yeah, and he'll just start up a conversation, which I've never been particularly good at. But
it's always nice to have somebody around like that.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. But I mean, I have this game also. I mean, it reminds me of the time when I was sick and I was in the hospital, and there's a lot of songs, a lot of albums, a lot of video games, and a lot of music, and a lot of things that just remind me of that time period, the early 90s, 96 into 97, and then again, unfortunately, in 99. Yeah, that one in particular really brings the beach house and the video game thing together, and really fond memories.
That's cool. Very cool. All right, well, let's move on to the next track. This is my pick. This is Rare Hero from the game Ridge Racer. Came out on the PlayStation in 1993. This particular track composed by Nobuyushi Seno.
Let it hit 'em.
All right, that was Rare Hero from Ridge Racer. Came out on the PS1 and the arcade, originally in 1993, composed by Nobuyoshi Sano. Fantastic track. I love this soundtrack. This game and this music are like almost two separate nostalgic points for me. The music, so like 1993, 1994 when this came out, I bought this same day as I bought the PlayStation 1 on launch day of the PlayStation 1, so it was like my first experience with the PlayStation. At that time, I was in high school. I was listening to like you, STP, Pearl Jam, all the grunge bands, and I booted this game up, and the first track I hear playing along with the racing is this music, Rare Hero. And I was like, from then on, it was like, what the heck is grunge? I'm a techno fan for the rest of my life. It was just so different and sounded like the video game music of the 8 and 16-bit era, but like more grown up and more advanced, like Super Adventure Island on the SNES, Yuzo Koshiro, that kind of music, but for real this time.
Yeah. It doesn't sound like video game music anymore.
Right,
like
exactly. And like really cool vocal samples and all this crazy stuff. And so I remember going out to like record stores, like Strawberries and all these CD places, like buying techno compilation CDs, because there's so many different kinds of techno that I was trying to find music that sounded like this music. And so it ended up being more like a hardcore house kind of, but I was like happy hardcore and GABA and all this stuff that I ended up liking, or jungle and drum and bass, and trying to find the specific brand of techno that this soundtrack was. And so I ended up getting this huge techno CD collection, kind of accidentally, just trying to find stuff that matched this music, and kind of falling in love with all the different kind of brands and genres of techno music, and really just kind of like made my musical tastes take a complete left turn.
Yeah, no kidding.
And my love for industrial kind of came along because to me it was a blend of this techno stuff, which I had recently fallen in love with, but then a lot of like the rock and the metal and the grunge stuff that I was a fan of beforehand. So it was kind of like having my cake and eating it too. I got the best of both worlds at once. And I don't think I would ever have gotten to that point had it not been for the Ridge Racer soundtrack. Oh, wow. It's kind of a crazy fate kind of a thing there. And then, so as far as the game goes, Ridge Racer for me was like a lifestyle, like instead of like just a hobby. It was something that I would play constantly, and it was the most technologically advanced game that I had at home, because it was my first PlayStation game, and I had a 3DO, but that thing is chunky compared to this. And I even had a Saturn, but it just, even like Sega Rally Championship just didn't hold a candle to what I felt like was capable with Ridge Racer. The control was just amazing. There was so much to unlock and do, and all these different cars you could get as you started beating all these record times and other competitor cars. And it was around this time that I was taking my driving test, going to driving school, learning to get my license, and I was never nervous getting into a car and taking my driving test, or just going out on the road with the instructor, because it always just felt like I was playing Ridge Racer in real life. I felt like the control that I had over the car in Ridge Racer, going that fast and skidding around corners and everything, that I was so confident in my control in that game, that when I was driving 30 miles an hour down my neighborhood roads,
this is nothing.
Exactly, it was nothing, and the control was better because I had an analog steering wheel instead of digital control pad. And I'm glad that happened, because if I were a nervous wreck getting into a car for the first time and thinking about all the things that could go wrong, I probably wouldn't have done nearly as well. And so, passed my driving test, with flying colors on the first try. And I even back then I credited it to the experience I had with Ridge Racer, and just being like in that first person view and driving around the track, and just being able to equate that to what's happening in real life. So
maybe they should make it part of the curriculum for new drivers, is to play Ridge Racer.
Perfect.
For maybe a month prior to road test.
I will become a lawmaker and put that into effect.
Sounds effective.
Yeah, but I was always a big racing game fan. It started off with Rad Racer way back in the day. And after that, anytime a new racing game would come out, I would try it out. I used to love. You remember Super Hang On in the arcades?
the
You would
motorcycle.
sit on the red motorcycle and lean back and forth to turn. Like that was the if I saw that in an arcade, I would beeline to that game. Something just about the analog control and being able to have that level of control over a vehicle really was cool to me. And I love driving.
It ties it to the real world and makes it a more
Exactly.
like a hands-on kind of experience.
Right, and like controlling Super Mario from left to right, it's not analog to anything you would experience in real life. Right. So yeah, you're exactly right. You can equate the behavior in the game to something you would do in real life, and so any driving game I would jump on and try to get as good as I could at, and to this day, like all the arcade racers are definitely what I gravitate towards, just because all those games that I played back then were arcade racers. You know, stuff like Gran Turismo and everything. They're too realistic for me. I would much rather just jump in a car, go 90 miles an hour, and skid around corners as fast as I can.
Crash into stuff and be totally fine.
Yeah,
flip over.
Exactly. Just kind of heightens what you would get in real life. Yeah. So, but yeah, that's my association with Ridge Racer. And again, it just there's that big Daytona versus Ridge Racer battle, just like the Mortal Kombat versus Street Fighter battle. And as much as I totally hate the Daytona USA soundtrack, I appreciate Daytona for what it is, but it just, as far as control and fluidity, the Ridge Racer series has just always been tops in my book, and it all started with turning on the PlayStation for the very first time ever and just learning to love this game. Yeah. So
I've never, I honestly don't think I've even seen this game.
Really?
Ridge Racer, yeah.
I think I've told this story a couple times on Pixel Tunes, but we would, with my family, go to Las Vegas every couple of years and stay in different hotels and just kind of experience, the Strip and all this. We weren't big gamblers, but it was just at that time, like the early 2000s, they were trying to make it more family friendly. So there were all these like museums and performances and just stuff that teens and kids and parents could all kind of like all go to and enjoy together. And in every hotel had a huge arcade in it. Gigantic arcades there, and this one arcade was owned by Namco, so it was just primarily Namco games, and they had a Ridge Racer arcade game where you actually sat in this red Miata, and there was this huge projection screen in front of it, and the controls in the car were hooked up to the video game, and so the you would hear the engine sound from underneath the car like it was actually like the car's motor, and then the music would come out of the car stereo speakers.
Wait, are you saying it was an actual red Miata?
Literally a car you would sit in. Yeah, and convertible red Miata, and you would sit in and close the door and start the game up, and then you would drive on the screen like you were looking through the windshield, and you would play the game. And I did really well. I came in first place, and was really really happy about that. But that was like. It kind of brought the real life driving and the Ridge Racer driving together for me. Yeah, I'd already had my license at that point, but I was like, this is where my life has been leading me to.
Yeah.
So yeah, really good memories with Ridge Racer. I still play it all the time. It's just been one of those games that kind of integrated itself into my real life, much more than a lot of other games has. So it's good stuff.
Very cool.
Yeah. So I feel like this next game probably has a big part in your life too, because I've heard you talk about it quite a bit.
Yeah, I'd say it does. So this is Dragon Warrior. I'm calling it Dragon Warrior because that was my experience.
That's what it's called over here.
Right.
So
Well, not anymore. But,
right.
Which is fine. But my experience, it was Dragon Warrior at the time. I don't think I even knew what Dragon Quest was.
Yeah.
But this is the overworld theme from the first Dragon Warrior game by Koichi Sugiyama, and this would be 1989, which is when we got it. So let's listen to it.
All right.
So that was the overworld theme from Dragon Warrior on the NES by Koichi Sugiyama. This is the game that pretty much, I mean, it doesn't make me unique. Lots of people, this was their first RPG. You know what I mean? This was the one that, well, technically, if you want to get super technical, my first RPG was King's Quest. The first King's Quest.
Oh, yeah.
Tandy computer.
That was even more of an adventure game.
Yeah.
Wasn't it? Yeah. In the same realm.
Right.
Yeah.
But this game, I didn't really have any real experience with RPGs. I hadn't really played them. I didn't even really actually know what they were. Or that they were even, it was even a genre, you know? I didn't know. And my brother was living in Florida at this time. This must have been 90, so this is late for me as far as this game goes, but this must have been 95, I want to say. Maybe 94. But he was living in Florida and working at a media play down there. I believe it was. So he would, once in a while, he would get me some games that they would have down there and send them to me. One time for, I think it was my birthday, he bought me a couple games. He would get me games not based on what I told him my preferences were or anything like that. He would just kind of pick them.
Send random stuff.
Right. And one time he sent me a couple games, one of which was Dragon Warrior, and it was complete. It was in the box with all the manuals and all the maps and everything.
Cool.
Which, from what I understand, is not that uncommon for this game because there's so many of them.
Right, because Nintendo Power sent them out for free.
Right. So it had the like the regular booklet that all games came with. It had like an adventurer's handbook. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. That's sort of like the size of the box, like a Super Nintendo booklet.
Yeah, like a little guide.
That sort of outlined the game. Not just the instructional kind of thing.
Yeah.
And it had a full map of Alfgard, which is the world or at least the continent in the first game. You later find out that that's only part of it.
Right.
So there was the map of Alfgard, and on the back of the map, it had all the monster chart. So it had all the monsters and all the stats and the gold and experience they give you, and the hit points and what level you should be at before you fight them, and like a color-coded map that showed like this one section would be red. Don't go to this section until you're at least level 6. Kind of thing.
Okay, that's cool.
So my first experience playing an RPG was having my hand held through the whole thing, because I thought to my 13-year-old brain or whatever, it's like, oh, this is how these games are played.
Yeah.
So I had the manual, I had the map, I had the step-by-step, go here, do this, and it was super fun to me. Like, oh, okay, I can go do that.
Sure.
So I just did step-by-step, which now kind of sounds like, oh, it sucks all the fun out of an RPG, but it did not at the time. That was the fun.
Right. I imagine as you're learning how to play an RPG,
right.
I feel like Nintendo really wanted to get people into the genre, which obviously worked. So this was kind of like conscious on their part. Otherwise, people would be like, "What am I doing?"
Right. Nintendo Power was big at the time too, so they wanted to have they filled that with maps and everything and walkthroughs and stuff. So it was basically like an early kind of walkthrough kind of thing. So, and I enjoyed every moment of it, like every enemy encounter, and there were things in this game, I mean, you just couldn't figure out without. Like there's a section in this one town where you have to find the fairy flute, and it's not like a trial you have to undertake to find this flute. You don't beat a boss to get it. You don't have to do anything crazy. You have to know that it just happens to be in the grass in this one this one square of this town. And there might be somebody in the game that tells you, go here, take 3 steps this way, 5 steps. I don't think there was. I don't remember that at all in that game. But it was in the book, and it would say, go to the town of, I want to say that town was called Hamlin or Cole. Hamlin, or one of those towns. And it would say, go to the fountain in the center of the town, take 5 steps south, 2 steps west, or whatever. I don't remember what it was, and search. You go to the search command, and you hit search, and it says you find the fairy flute.
Wow.
Like, how would you know to do that?
Right, exactly.
And then in like the more recent versions of the games, what they did was they make it so when, like, if you were to play that game, like on like a mobile version of it, which I did actually a couple years ago, you go to that spot, you don't have the manuals, they didn't change it. They changed the dialogue, but they didn't put that in there. What they do is they add this little spot on the ground where the light light is emitting from it. It's like a just like kind of flashing.
Like a little glow.
Something is shiny there.
Yeah.
Like, ooh, what's
yeah.
that shiny thing? And that's what they've done through pretty much all the Dragon Quest games recently. Like
Makes
all
sense.
the remakes and everything. So, but you see it, and you're like, oh, there's a thing there, and you get it. It's like there's no mystery to it. Like
Yeah. At the same time that there's nothing pointing to that,
Right, but
then that's where people are going to get stuck
That's
forever.
what I'm saying.
and ever.
I get why they
Yeah.
did it. It's just sort of like when I compare it to the experience of,
Right,
you know,
right.
like walking through the.
There's a big group of people nowadays that just will not look at guides. You know, even though they're available over the web, they feel like it's cheating, and so if they can't get through it, then they're never gonna
I'm
default
typically
to that.
like that too.
Yeah.
Like I am normally that way. After I played this game, I had all the books in my stupid brain. I'm thinking, all right, these games just come with all this the stuff you need to walk through the game. I didn't know there were any more of these. I thought Dragon Warrior was what it was, and that was it.
Yeah.
One day I was, I was looking through a Funcoland price list, which I'm sure you're
Very familiar. Used to work there.
Yeah. I would just scan through the list and look and just see the games and the prices and just look at it. I would read that thing like a normal person reads a newspaper. just scan through
I remember doing the same thing.
games. And I remember seeing, Dragon Warrior. Wait, Dragon Warrior 2? Dragon Warrior 3? Wait, there's a fourth one? And so, I made it my life goal to get every one of them. So, not to veer too far away from this particular game and track, but my experience with Dragon Warrior early on was getting those 4 games.
Yeah.
I had to get them.
That was your quest.
Yeah, it's absolutely right. So I got the second game, and the way I got it, which is sort of a little funny story.
You found it in a patch of grass, glowing.
I wish. But no, it was Funcoland. But my grandmother had given me some money so I could get a Genesis very recently at this point. So I had a Genesis when I got the first Dragon Warrior game. But I wanted Dragon Warrior 2 so badly, and I didn't have any income or money. Wasn't getting an allowance, I don't think, at the time. So I had to get it however I could get it. So I brought my Genesis and whatever, maybe 2 or 3 games I had for it to Funcoland, and I will never forget the look on the guy's face.
Wow.
I was like, You're
selling a Genesis for what?
I'm trading this in this Genesis because I want this Nintendo game. And the look on his face, obviously I can't put it through the speakers, but it was just like, what? What did you just say?
Where do the other guys get a load of this?
Yeah, right. So I traded in my Genesis, which was at the time was worth more than they are now, because they're a dime a dozen now. But the Dragon Warrior games, those 4 games, have really held their value.
Yeah.
And honestly, they were pricey at the time. Like when I was playing those games at the time, they were even passé then, because Super Nintendo and Genesis were current.
Right.
They were even sort of late. It was late in their lifespan. So NES games were, they were kind of like the old stuff that the kids played.
Right.
But those games really held their value. Maybe not the first one. The first one never really went.
It's just because of the high print run. But I think, those RPGs, they were played by more hardcore gamers.
Yeah.
And more hardcore gamers would hold on to their collections more than the kids that would go out and play, find ice hockey or whatever and get bored with it and trade it in.
Yeah.
So, understandable. They're just harder to find at Funcoland.
Yeah. But when I went to get them, they were there. I think there might have been one of them at one time, which I had to wait a little bit. But for the most part, I got them when I wanted to get them.
Cool.
And so I got the second game, and it was not like the first one.
Yeah.
It was like, because they didn't have it. It was just a cartridge. I didn't get any books or anything with it. Which I didn't think about at the time. I was like, whatever, I got it. That's awesome. I'm going to play it.
Yeah.
I played the first one, so now I know how it works. I'm just going to play this one. The game is 5 times as long and as complicated as the first game, with no maps and manuals. I got stuck. Oh my god.
Get in the water, yeah.
I got so stuck in that game at certain times.
And there's no game facts or anything on the web
nothing.
to
I was totally lost. I met a guy, I think, in an AOL chat room one day that was able to help me get unstuck. I think in that game. I bought the third one before beating the second one. I bought the fourth one before beating the third one.
Wow.
Because I got stuck in part 2 and part 3. Part 4 became one of my favorite games, and is still to this day, I think, is my favorite RPG. The first one and the fourth one are the only 2 I beat on my own, even though the first one technically I didn't, because I had all the help in the world in the book.
Yeah.
But the fourth one I beat by myself, but that guy that I met online actually helped me with the second one and the third one. But
Cool. little NPCs along the way.
Yeah. That first game, just my experience with that game was not like any other RPG because I wasn't guided through any of them. I sort of, I developed into like a legitimate RPG player at a point when I started playing, like Final Fantasy. That's it.
That's it.
That one, yeah.
I don't know. I was never a big RPG guy. Like I would play the Final Fantasy series. I played Breath of Fire on the SNES. I really enjoyed Earthbound. But that was really about it. I think, having to share a console with a brother when I was a kid kind of made it hard because if we weren't both into the game, I couldn't hog the system for that long to play, a video game like that. So games that we were both into, like Final Fantasy 3 or 6 as it's referred to as now, was good looking enough and had a cool enough story that my brother would like to watch it. So we would be able to kind of play that together.
It's a deep game. Actually.
Yeah, and it's a fantastic looking game.
Yeah.
And so I beat that one. But the other more simple games like Dragon Quest or Dragon Warrior, he just wouldn't have the patience to sit there and watch me.
I totally get that.
Walk around and
No one watched me play that one. I played that one on my own. I can't.
It's a game you need to experience by playing rather than watching.
And the first game, the first Dragon Warrior game is so simplistic, and the story is as basic as you can get in like a fantasy game.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like the princess has been taken, you have to rescue the princess. That turns out to only be half of the game. But still, it's just go beat the bad guy and restore the land to its former glory.
Exactly.
And that's they get more complicated with the later games, sort of. But that's the gist of it.
Yeah. And Final Fantasy introduced a lot of other complications and complicated characters, so that was their kind of bread and butter.
That was their thing, and they kind of tried to amp it up with every game.
Yeah.
Didn't always work. But with the Dragon Quest series, it was the formulaic nature of it that made it so successful, at least over in Japan.
Exactly. Cool.
Yeah.
Well, taking another 180, let's move on to another racing game for me, also on the PlayStation, believe it or not. So this one is Micro Machines V3. This came out on the PlayStation in 1997. This is Prepare to Race from composer Tim Bartlett. All right, that was Ready to Race from Micro Machines V3 on the PlayStation, composed by Tim Bartlett. This is another game where it's like situationally based, kind of like Lee Trevino at my grandparents' house and you at the beach house. Mm-hmm. So this is a game that I was in college. I had a steady girlfriend while I was in college, and her name was Stephanie. And so this was a game that we had at her place. So I'd only ever play the game there. it was weird having like a girlfriend that liked video games because none of my previous ones had ever even like wanted to care about them at all. Right. So when we started going out and like eventually, you know, like went to her house and saw a PlayStation there, I was like, oh my God, this is crazy. Imagine, what do you play?
Marry me now.
So we had these 2 games at her place. We had Micro Machines V3, which we would play a lot, and then we also had Super Puzzle Fighter. Basically, like, you know, like a puzzle game with the Street Fighter characters playing it. And she was like super good at that game. Like I could not beat her at that game. And then Micro Machines was the other way around. So it's like I was pretty good at it, and she wasn't as good. So we would like split our nights up. We'd be like, okay, so I'll kick your ass at Micro Machines for a little while, and then you can kick my ass at Puzzle Fighter for a little while. And it was fine. It was a great agreement that we had going on. But this game was just so much fun because it's just this kind of like top-down, like sort of isometric view racing game where if you're not like keeping up with the rest of the group, then you automatically lose. So it's like whoever can race far enough to get the other person to like get off the back of the screen as you go around the track. And if you're racing with more than 2 people on the screen, then it's like they'll drop off one by one, and the last person to drop off, you know, the last person left standing gets a point. And so it kind of like ping pongs back and forth like a tug of war. So you'll have a bar that's like half red and half blue. And as you get points, you get more towards the red or more towards the blue, and you have to fill up the entire bar with your color in order to win that match. It's
like that
total
idea.
combat racing.
Sounds fun.
It's a lot of fun, and it kept things nice and even. So if you weren't completely skillful at the game, you could still kind of like try to eke your way out through using dastardly tricks. And there were weapons and stuff too. It was kind of like Mario Kart. So you could you could bash your player off the side of the road if you're not going to beat them in any other way. So yeah, we had a lot of fun. I was trying to figure out how best to describe this particular track and the nostalgia for this track because when 2 people start going out with each other, they like to hang out with each other.
Yeah, once in a while.
And so a lot of that time would be spent playing video games on a couch or doing other things on couches, and and sometimes it was in the middle of playing video games.
Playing other video games.
Playing other types of games.
Right.
So a lot of those other types of games were played to this background music, because this is like the stage select, getting ready to play kind of.
Cool.
Yeah, so I guess you could say there were a lot of makeout sessions to this particular track.
That's super nerdy.
Yeah, so
in the best way.
So this particular song brings a lot of interesting fond memories, I guess, of that, and that's probably about as far as I'll go into that kind of nostalgia. But yeah, I mean, it was like I said, it was fun having somebody other than my brother to play with. I would go to friends' houses every once in a while when I was a kid and play video games with friends, but they were mostly like into the sports games, so it was always like Madden or Bulls versus Blazers or something like that. And then to have somebody else to play with that's actually into other things besides sports and new games that like my brother wasn't into, it was just a cool experience. So we dated for like 2.5 years, and we were always getting new games together. We loved playing like Worms. Do you remember that game where like 2 teams of worms on either side of a screen, and they had to like launch like guns at each other and stuff? Oh, so much fun. But we used to play that together all the time. So yeah, it was a good relationship until it wasn't. But
that's usually the case.
Yeah, but games were a big part of that. So listening to this music, and again, this is one of those games that I really haven't played outside of that situation. Mm-hmm. So anytime I see screenshots or hear this particular song, I'm always like transported back into like her second story bedroom.
I have something like that too.
Yeah,
I had a girlfriend one time way back that was also into video games, and there were certain games that like I would play them, and she would be like sitting on the couch like drawing maps or
that's cool.
or documenting like where I found like certain items and stuff. There wasn't a whole lot else in that relationship that was all that fantastic, but like that is something that like I do kind of look back on that fondly, just having someone to play the games with, and certain games you associate, that you played at that time. There's you have memories associated with everything.
Sure.
Nostalgia for something.
Exactly.
Nostalgia something.
Exactly. So this one's one of those. And if you guys are looking for a great multiplayer racing game to play on the PlayStation, you can't go wrong with Micro Machines V3. It's got great graphics, tons of different stages and different cars you can unlock and stuff. It's a good time. It's made by Codemasters, and those guys were always really good at making good quality games. So
I loved Micro Machines when I was a kid.
yeah, I had them too.
They still make them?
I don't know.
I doubt it.
I know they still make the games. I know there's a Micro Machines game that just came out for mobile.
They must
and
make
it's
them.
very similar to. Yeah, you're probably right. But it plays very similar to Micro Machines V3. But of course, it's because it's mobile. It's like you got to pay to win kind of a deal. I tried it out for a little while just based on the nostalgia I have for this game, and immediately was like, this does not capture the feel of the original game. So it's kind of unfortunate. Let's move on to our next track. This totally obscure game. What do you got coming up next?
Well, no one's heard of this game, but I'll talk about it anyway. This is a game called Sonic the Hedgehog. It was on the Genesis. This is The Labyrinth Zone by Masato Nakamura.
All right, this was a hard soundtrack to get a hold of, so let's take a listen.
Pull some strings. That was Labyrinth Zone from the first Sonic the Hedgehog game on the Genesis from 1991 by Masato Nakamura. So this also happens to be my favorite Sonic track.
I don't blame you.
Yeah, there's a lot going on in it. There's a lot of layers and a lot of instruments and a lot of stuff. I think this track tends to get overlooked or sort of forgotten or not appreciated because when you're playing the game, it's constantly interrupted by the drowning.
Yep.
The nerve-wracking just... Where's the air? I need a bubble. I need a bubble.
I think lots of people have negative nostalgia for this level, so that therefore they don't really appreciate the music as much.
Yeah, but for me though, I think the first time I heard this track, my uncle was playing this game. So, where do I start? So, after my parents separated, and my dad and my sister and I left East Windsor, Connecticut, which is where we were living for years. I kind of grew up there, my childhood anyway. My dad was sort of in between jobs, and so my sister and I went to stay with my aunt in Norwalk, and my dad went to live with his girlfriend, which is the girlfriend whose house where I beat Tiny Toons.
Gotcha.
So my sister and I went to live with my aunt, and they had just recently gotten the Genesis. And I don't think I had played one yet. I think it was my first experience playing one. And they had Sonic, they had the Little Mermaid game, which I used to play the hell out of that game. Holy cow.
Did they have kids, or did they just play the Genesis for themselves?
Yeah, they had their two daughters at the time, two kids, my cousins. They're quite a bit younger than I am.
I guess that explains the Little Mermaid game.
Little Mermaid, yeah. They had they had a Carmen Sandiego game, which was pretty fun.
Yep.
But that Sonic is what I had heard of it before. Like I had a friend who had it.
I know this Sonic guy.
Yeah. But I don't think I had played it. This was 92. This was summer of 92. This game in particular, this track in particular, takes me back to that time when I was living with my aunt and my cousins in this nice, quiet little neighborhood in Norwalk. One memory in particular that I associate with this game, not this track, but playing this game in my aunt's basement. They had like a little furnished basement, which was the playroom for the kids, and they had a little TV set up with the Genesis hooked up to it. And one day I was playing. I was only in the Green Hill, so I had just started playing. I was probably in like the second act of the stage.
Yeah.
And I'm playing, and I'm starting to notice, like, why does the screen is starting to look a little funny? Like, there's some kind of, like, spots that I can't really see where I'm going. It's getting a little blurry in spots. And I just was like, I gotta stop playing. Like, something's wrong with my eyes. I'm, like, rubbing my eyes. Like, what is going on? When I stop playing, I'm looking around the room, and I'm seeing the same thing. This weird anomaly just sort of floating around, and it's blurring my vision. And so I was like, I don't know what to do. I'm just gonna go lay down. I'm going to go lay down, see if, close my eyes, see if it gets better. The blurriness goes away. Very slowly, I start getting this headache.
Uh-oh.
So this is
like
what I'm telling you.
Migraine, basically?
This is what I'm telling you is the story of my first migraine.
I guess.
So it was a horrible. I had a really bad go with migraines when I was younger. When I was a teenager, for several years, I would get. It's the worst. I don't wish it on anybody. Like the intense pain and it's just awful. So I associate basically my first experience with the migraine with the first Sonic the Hedgehog game, but I still have very fond memories of the game. It doesn't ruin it for me. And the Labyrinth Zone really takes me back to when I first moved in with my aunt, and my uncle was playing the game, and he wasn't a video game guy, but he got to the Labyrinth Zone at least, which is pretty far into the game.
Yeah.
And that song, like, it's so good that at the end of like the chorus section, like where it's sort of like the hook at the very end of the loop.
Yep.
That's, to me, I sort of that is like the hook of the song to me. And it's a sort of a short loop, but it is of the first two games, which are the soundtracks that I love. The third game is very good, but it's different. They went in a different direction, different composers.
Yeah.
There's a whole thing behind that we don't need to get into, but those two games really, I love those soundtracks, and this is not only do I have the nostalgia for this, it also happens to be one of my favorite tracks.
Yeah, same here. I've always felt like this particular track, especially that B section, reminds me a lot of like some of Michael Jackson's more like positive, like upbeat songs.
Odd how that happened.
We ended
up working.
That's the thing, is that my theory ended up being, okay, either because I know Jackson used to like Sega games and play them a lot. If he had these tracks in his head, particularly this one, and it started influencing his later stuff, or if this is like the music that gave him the idea to reach out to Sega to say, can we work together, that. So if this particular track just kind of like resonated with him somehow or another, I don't know. It's just obviously a wild theory, but I don't know. For some reason, whenever I hear those kind of like almost delayed notes towards the middle of the song, it always kind of reminds me of a lot of the
stagger to it.
Like it kind of reminds me of a lot of the later stuff that he would put out. So I don't know.
There's a lot going on in these songs, and this particular track. Every time I listen to it, like I don't necessarily hear something new every time, but like I'll hear it maybe differently. Like there's a lot of like little instruments in the background and a lot of interplay between the parts.
Right.
This has been one of those songs that I've always wanted to cover in some way. Like I want to record
that would be cool.
Some version of it, but I think with just guitars and bass, it might not. There'd need to be some keys in there or something. Something
a little punchy. To bring those lead notes out. And Nakamura was not a video game composer by trade. No. So I think that's why. Well, yeah.
That he never,
moved on to other games. Yeah, I think he kind of had his fill after the two Sonics. But I feel like also that's why these soundtracks stick out so much and are so unique, because he brought so much other experience with him onto the Genesis sound chip. Yeah. So, you hear these songs and they're unmistakably Sonic. Even if you only knew a couple of the tracks, if you heard another track from the same soundtrack you weren't familiar with, you'd probably still be able to associate that with the Sonic brand. My first Genesis game was Sonic 2, so I didn't even really play Sonic 1 at all. So, that's my Sonic soundtrack, and then Sonic 1 feels kind of strange to me a little bit, so really interesting. So let's move on to our next track and the last one of the show. This is the game Driver, another driving game on the PlayStation. I picked 3 by accident, I guess, without even thinking about it. This is the track New York Night from Alistair Brimble. All right, that was New York Night, composed by Alistair Brimble for the game Driver, which came out on the PlayStation in 1999. This game is fun as hell, and it was the first game that had like what they tried to pass off as like real-world driving physics and an open-world city. So this kind of like what Grand Theft Auto was trying to do originally with the top-down 2D style game that Grand Theft Auto and Grand Theft Auto 2 had. This invented the 3D real city driving. Okay. And so this was king of the heap for a while, and then Grand Theft Auto 3 really kind of took it 10 miles to the left and created a real living city that you can walk around in.
Beat up hookers, which is
and
always missing from video games.
All that incredible stuff that Grand Theft Auto is known for. But Driver always kept it a little bit more clean, and it wasn't until like a couple more games after this that you could actually get out of the car and start walking around, and they tried to make it more like Grand Theft Auto, so they ended up playing catch up with the game that was inspired by them originally. But Driver 1 was this just great game where you could drive around these different city maps and do heists and go on car chases and do a lot of this stuff that without this kind of physics engine that they developed, you really wouldn't be able to do and have as much fun with in other games. My nostalgia for this particular track in this particular game come from this one mini game that you could select off of the menu screen. They were survival modes. And so what it would be is you would be dropped into the center of this map with this particular car, and the cops would be after you. And the cops in this game are like, I don't even know how to describe them. They're psychotic. They will ram their cars into you any which way possible. They will like jump over like buildings to get to you. It's insane, and it's so much fun. So you start, particularly in the San Francisco map, you start in the middle of this green, and you're surrounded by building blocks on all sides. And so me and my brother and a bunch of our friends would gather around we shared a basement, and my brother and I had a bedroom in a finished basement downstairs in our raised ranch, so it was a pretty big room. We would all gather around the entertainment center, laying on each other's beds, and we would all take turns trying to see how long we could survive against this onslaught of police cars. Dude, I wish that like Twitch streaming or YouTube streaming existed back then, because I would have set up a camera, because we were just hooting and hollering and like yelling at each other the whole time. We would just spend hours and hours every night on this one particular map playing survival mode and trying to get as far as we possibly could.
I imagine like the zombies from 28 Days Later wearing cop uniforms, just like rushing at you, trying to eat you.
Not even, but just imagine them as cars, as cop cars.
Yeah.
And so you would have, a damage meter. So you could take a couple hits before, finally, before your car was finally disabled. But the best part about the San Francisco map is that it would drop you off right in the hilly section. So you could drive down a hill and then stop at the bottom of the hill and spin the camera around, and you would see all these cops come flying over your head as they're going over the hill. And then they would land and kind of turn around and skid and try to get back up. But by then you're already coming up the hill and going back to the green again.
Like Twisted Metal or something.
Yeah, basically playing tag. And it was just absolutely hilarious. And, if you really got good and you started learning the techniques, you learned that if you could pick a particular spot on the sidewalk and just drive down the sidewalk, the cops would not drive on that area. So you could last as long as you could going down this one particular straight, and even the cops coming from the other direction would kind of swerve towards you, but then swerve away as soon as they would get to the sidewalk.
Clearly the game's broken then.
Unplayable mess.
Yeah.
But the roads wouldn't last forever. There wasn't any infinite straightaways because it's an enclosed city. So eventually you'd have to get to an intersection and, try to, make your way to another. But by then you've got a ton of cops on your back. And so, we just had such a blast playing this game. And I don't think any other mode in any other game came nearly as close to having as much fun as we did. Just this random discovery. My brother and I played it once, just trying to get the best time, and then we're like, oh my god, this is so much fun, we gotta invite friends over. And so, probably 8 or 9 of us in this tiny little bedroom gathered around this tube TV, playing Driver and trying to get the best time, and fun was had. And I would love to do it again. I would actually love to gather a bunch of friends nowadays and set this mode up and try to do it just to see if we had as much fun.
Yeah, it does sound like fun.
And it's a simple game. It's really easy to get the hang of because you're just basically driving. There's no shooting involved. You're just hanging out and having fun and chasing or being chased. So
try not to get murdered by the rabid cops.
Exactly, psychotic cops of San Francisco. But not much else to that story. It's probably not too interesting, but it was just really positive, really fun emotions that I get from
that was a fun
this game. But yeah, so that pretty much sums up the show. Cam, I feel like I've really gotten to know you a lot better through the show.
Definitely, it's a fun show to do.
I hope you guys listening at home enjoyed it. If you want to hear more nostalgia-based shows, definitely let us know. I know probably a bunch of you are, fans of the VGM Jukebox, so we kind of tried to get that feel of those testimonials kind of coming through. But, I would love to do this kind of show with other people or even have Cam back again to do it. So, leave us a comment. You can always hit us up at facebook.com/groups/thevgembassy and find the post where this show is and leave a comment there. Head over to our spanking brand new beautiful website at thevgembassy.com and leave comments there. I know, like with my older show Pixel Tunes, we didn't get a lot of comments on our website. And I know, guys, if you don't have social media accounts or don't want to use it to join groups or whatever, please feel free to leave us feedback on the website, because I will get notifications and I can absolutely respond back to you. I'd love to make that a little bit more of an active hub for the show itself. Also on Twitter, at the VG Embassy, we'll be there as well. You can find us on iTunes. If you're listening on iTunes, please leave us a rating. That'll help give the show a little bit more visibility and help introduce the show to other potential listeners. I want to thank Indira J for the amazing artwork of that wonderful embassy building with all the kind of built-in little video game icons that you can see if you zoom in. Yeah, I had the idea for it, and she really took that idea and ran with it and made some really good art out of it. Trevin Hughes, otherwise known as Dread, for the amazing soundtrack. Dude, I'm just...
Love it. Yeah.
Coming off a very feely episode, I've just been blessed with lots of talented people that were very interested in helping me out put this show together. Sure. So thank you to both of them. And again, like I said, feedback on anything is awesome. And so this is the last pre-recorded show. And I keep saying that every single show, but this time I absolutely promise. The last one before the show launch. It is the tail end of June right now as of this recording, and we're set to release in just about a week or so, and I'm getting more and more anxious by the minute. Yeah. Like I said, I'd love to hear you guys' feedback, and head over to the Patreon page. There will be a link on the website right underneath the banner that will lead to the Patreon, and there you can find out about how you guys can become more interactive with the show. Different tiers will have different abilities to suggest show themes or to actually be on the show, blind listen stuff. So take a look at it, and if you could find it in your heart to throw a couple bucks my way, I'm trying to get some better equipment, some better microphones for the show, a mixer so we can kind of do more live interaction with the music while we're talking, kind of like Legacy Music Hour or Pixelated Audio does. So it would be great if I could kind of up the show's abilities to do that stuff. But with, a wife and 2 kids and a town job, it's hard to afford all that stuff. Right. So, again, thank you very much, Cam, for hanging out with me. I'd love to have you back on a future episode.
Thanks so much for having me. This was a lot of fun.
So where else can we find you on the web, speaking of which?
Well, I'm usually puttering around on the various video game-related groups, such as this one, the XVGM Radio, Mike's podcast, that site, the group, the Pixel Tunes group. Mm-hmm. I don't spend a whole lot of time on the social medias lately, but I do usually poke in there for one reason or another. I'm not doing anything particularly video gamey as far as creative stuff these days. I have a couple bands, and like I said before, if the people who are listening are in our age group, they might be interested in the stuff I do. I play in a acoustic 90s cover band. We cover lots of stuff from that era, grunge and other types of rock. Plaid Nation Revival. I don't want to give you the website because it's 5 years long, and just search if you're interested. We're on Facebook. We're on you can find us. You can find the website.
Yeah, I'll put the URL on the show notes too. Sure. So.
As I mentioned earlier, I'm also in a Stone Temple Pilots tribute band called Dumb Love. which is like a dream come true for me because
They were one of my favorite bands back in the
I've
day,
wanted
too.
to do this for so long. Robert DeLeo was my inspiration as a bass player, and has been since the early days. So, if you're interested in that, you can check that out. And I really want to get back into the video game music cover thing with my buddy Cam Childs, who many of you probably know. One of you probably
He'll be a VG ambassador eventually, I'm sure.
I hope
We've
so.
already talked about some stuff.
We talk on occasion about doing some more recording. We recorded 4 songs. I think it's been a couple of years now. It's
been a while,
we recorded the last one, but that's a lot of fun. And at some point, I want to be able to maybe get together with him again and crank out a song, at least on a somewhat regular basis, because that's a lot of fun. But if you want to hear what we did way back at this point, Kamicom is what we call ourselves, and we have a YouTube channel, a SoundCloud channel, and you can look us up there if you want to hear the few songs we did.
Cool, kind of like Famicom with a C, right? Because you're both named Cam, so it's
Correct.
very clever.
Yes.
Very cool. All right, guys. Well, this is my last pre-launch show, and I look forward to hearing all the feedback from you guys. And, if you are a web content creator or just a huge fan of video game music, you can reach out to me at ed@thevgembassy.com. And if you want to, have any suggestions for putting a show together, let's talk, let's chat. Let's see if you can come on and be another VG ambassador. So we will be back next week with a brand new show. For once, I don't know what it is because I haven't even thought about it yet. So it'll be a nice surprise. Anyways, we will see you guys next time. Take care.
See ya.